Legally speaking, criminal responsibility in Germany begins at the age of 14. It is assumed that younger children are simply incapable committing crimes because it is believed that, due to their age, they are not able to inflict serious harm on others. Moreover, from a psychological perspective, it is believed they are not capable of wishing death upon anyone. However, today's story completely refutes this view. We will recount the events that recently took place in 2023. This horrifying incident has completely overturned the German law enforcement authorities' perspective on the shortcomings of their own criminal justice system. This case became one of the most sensational criminal cases in Europe in 2023. The striking aspect was less the brutality of the murder and more the age of the participant. Moreover, their age was so young that leading psychiatrists could not predict what these children might become. In any case, some of the characters in this video will remain unnamed and without pictures, as the law of the country protects them in this regard. Louise was a resident of Freudenberg, Germany. In 2023, she had just turned 12 years old. The girl attended the local school and showed good performance. She was quiet and shy, even a bit too shy. The student was so gentle that other children eventually began to see it as a weakness. The girl avoided conflict, and therefore some children started to mock her at school. At first, she simply ignored the teasing, but gradually it turned into bullying. Despite her young age, Louise felt the unjustified anger of others. Several other girls began bullying her, and it seemed they would not stop. The protagonist of the story wanted to handle the problem herself. Louise did not tell her parents or her teachers at school about the incident. But two girls, around 12 or 13 years old, regularly picked her up after school and accompanied her home, mocking and taunting her. They intentionally chose a time when they would not be seen by adults. The cruel jokes continued during classes and breaks whenever they found time to ridicule the girl in front of her classmates. All of this happened at times when the teachers were unaware of what was going on. In fact, Louise and these girls had been friends for a long time. After the failure of their relationship, Louise hoped that things would return to normal and that the girls could communicate as they had before. However, the situation only got worse. Over several months, the bullying became a daily occurrence, and it seemed that the two girls came to school only to harass their ex-friend. The protagonist of the story was afraid to fight back. Despite the bullying, she tried to extend a verbal hand to her tormentors, but it did not work. As is always the case in such situations, the impunity only worsened the behavior. The perpetrators became bolder, sometimes even flying into a rage. Legally speaking, criminal responsibility in Germany begins at the age of 14. It is assumed that younger children are simply incapable committing crimes because it is believed that, due to their age, they are not able to inflict serious harm on others. Moreover, from a psychological perspective, it is believed they are not capable of wishing death upon anyone. However, today's story completely refutes this view. We will recount the events that recently took place in 2023. This horrifying incident has completely overturned the German law enforcement authorities' perspective on the shortcomings of their own criminal justice system. This case became one of the most sensational criminal cases in Europe in 2023. The striking aspect was less the brutality of the murder and more the age of the participant. Moreover, their age was so young that leading psychiatrists could not predict what these children might become. In any case, some of the characters in this video will remain unnamed and without pictures, as the law of the country protects them in this regard. Louise was a resident of Freudenberg, Germany. In 2023, she had just turned 12 years old. The girl attended the local school and showed good performance. She was quiet and shy, even a bit too shy. The student was so gentle that other children eventually began to see it as a weakness. The girl avoided conflict, and therefore some children started to mock her at school. At first, she simply ignored the teasing, but gradually it turned into bullying. Despite her young age, Louise felt the unjustified anger of others. Several other girls began bullying her, and it seemed they would not stop. The protagonist of the story wanted to handle the problem herself. Louise did not tell her parents or her teachers at school about the incident. But two girls, around 12 or 13 years old, regularly picked her up after school and accompanied her home, mocking and taunting her. They intentionally chose a time when they would not be seen by adults. The cruel jokes continued during classes and breaks whenever they found time to ridicule the girl in front of her classmates. All of this happened at times when the teachers were unaware of what was going on. In fact, Louise and these girls had been friends for a long time. After the failure of their relationship, Louise hoped that things would return to normal and that the girls could communicate as they had before. However, the situation only got worse. Over several months, the bullying became a daily occurrence, and it seemed that the two girls came to school only to harass their ex-friend. The protagonist of the story was afraid to fight back. Despite the bullying, she tried to extend a verbal hand to her tormentors, but it did not work. As is always the case in such situations, the impunity only worsened the behavior. The perpetrators became bolder, sometimes even flying into a rage. On Saturday, March 11th, they planned to spend the evening together as agreed. That day, Louise's mother and father noticed how much their daughter had changed. In recent months, she had been depressed, often locking herself in her room and not communicating well. She no longer wanted to go to school. Now, it seemed everything was turning for the better. The student had a smile on her face and was in a good mood. Naturally, her mother was also happy and readily let her go to her friends. The woman had heard about their quarrels and was glad the girls had restored their friendship. She had seen how shy her daughter was and knew how difficult it was for her to make friends, though she was just as happy as Louise herself. The friends lived not far from each other, and there was a path between their houses that led through a small forest, but it was also possible to take a detour via the city streets. This route seemed safer, and it was always the path Louise chose. After lunch, the protagonist of the story went for the agreed visit. When she arrived at her friend's house, she called her mother to report that she had arrived. The student planned to spend a few hours there and then return home. Her parents set a deadline for her to be home by 6 p.m. and asked her not to be late. Louise was, however, a responsible girl and always followed her parents' rules. This time, however, she did not come home on time. Her mother became worried and called her daughter, but she did not answer. More than 15 minutes passed, but the girl did not return. Numerous calls went unanswered, and even messages sent through messengers were not read by Louise. The mother became increasingly worried. Then she called the friend at whose house the meeting took place. The girl reported that the protagonist of the story had left a long time ago, as had the other friend. It had been over half an hour, which meant Louise should have been home long ago. After several more unsuccessful attempts to reach her daughter by phone, the mother and father began to search for her. They got into the family car and drove along the route where their daughter was supposed to be, checking several shops, but the student was nowhere to be found. People they questioned had not seen anyone who looked like Louise. All the while, the daughter's mobile phone remained silent. Finally, the mother and father decided to go to the police. They filed a report about the child's disappearance, providing the police officers with all the information they needed to start searching for her. The police took the report seriously, as it concerned a 12-year-old child. The town where they lived was quite small, with about 17,000 inhabitants, and the community was very close-knit. Many people here knew each other, so the incident had alarmed the citizens. Most had families and children who were now in danger. The law enforcement authorities turned to the media to involve volunteers in the search and rescue operation. But even without this, a large number of people volunteered to help Louise's family. Additionally, it was necessary to send out a warning in case there were witnesses with valuable information. The search for the girl began that same evening, but the darkness of the night limited the possibilities and made the search difficult. Both units with dogs and aviation were involved in the operation. Early in the morning, Volunteers and searchers were heavily engaged in the case. Meanwhile, the police officers spoke with the two friends with whom Louise had met the evening she disappeared. The students appeared worried and frightened, which was not surprising as they were 12 and 13-year-old girls. They were likely concerned about their friend and themselves. Their parents were also worried because any of them could have been in Louise's place. There was a fear that a child abductor might be lurking in the neighborhood. Initially, the volunteers searched the neighboring area between the friends' houses. Police officers began to check the immediate neighborhood of the teenager, in the hope of finding out if she might have been acquainted with anyone dangerous. The only suspicious information the investigators could gather were the statements of the schoolteacher who taught all three children. According to the teacher's statement, Louise had complained about these friends only 2 days before her disappearance. However, this seemed insignificant, and nothing suspicious could be found beyond that. On Sunday afternoon, a group of volunteers went through the forest area between the girls' houses. There was also a shorter path that Louise could have taken to get home. She had never taken this path before, but it was worth exploring, and for good reason. About 3 kilometers from Louise's house, near the old train station, a girl's body was found. The victim had been hit on the head with a blunt object. A plastic bag was found on her head, and the girl's clothes were soaked in blood. Forensic examination allowed for the identification of the body, which turned out to be the missing Louise. Apparently, the student had died an unnatural death. The medical examiner found more than 30 stab wounds on her body. These were shallow stab wounds located on almost all parts of the dead girl's body. Several large blood vessels had been severed. According to the medical examiner's findings, the cause of death was excessive blood loss. After receiving the inflicted injuries, she quickly lost consciousness and died within minutes before reaching her home. There were no signs of dragging on the body, and there was no indication of sexual assault. It seemed to be a senseless murder, as if the student had been simply attacked with a knife, stabbed dozens of times, and left in the forest. The police did find evidence of a struggle, but no definitive proof was found. Most importantly, there was no murder weapon, which greatly complicated the search for the perpetrator. Authorities believed they were dealing with a psychopath who had an intense rage against the girl. The nature and number of wounds suggested that the murderer was in a psychotic state, just striking without feeling anything, until Louise no longer showed any signs of life. They also believed this rage was not random, but possibly based on personal motives. Investigators began to take a closer look at the young victim's immediate surroundings. She was naturally modest and quiet, never getting involved with bad company or dangerous people. She had no dependencies on addictive substances. Louise also had no mental health issues. She did not run away from home and had never thought of taking her own life. In fact, there were no potentially dangerous people in the girl's immediate surrounding. The girl came from a wealthy, respected family. Her parents also had no problems with the law or the neighborhood. Investigators decided to talk again with her friends, who were 12 and 13 years old at the time. They hoped the girls might have noticed something suspicious, perhaps seeing Louise leave and being watched by someone. But the children saw nothing and no one. This interaction was not in vain, however. After meeting with the police, their fear seemed to grow with each passing moment. Finally, one of the girls could no longer endure the question and practically screamed that they were the ones who had stabbed Louise. Then she covered her face with her hands and cried. The news was so shocking that even the police officers thought it was a bad joke, but the girl assured them it was true. She sobbed and apologized to her parents. In a normal situation, the police officers would have immediately arrested someone who had confessed to stabbing a child 30 times. In this case, however, it was children aged 12 and 13 who had taken up weapons and, under the law, could not be prosecuted. Apparently, the students, as well as the local community, were shocked by the news. After conversations with the children, parents, and lawyers, the girl's confession was confirmed. Her friend also confessed. The two offenders detailed what had happened. According to the girls, they had indeed bullied their old friend for several months over previous minor disagreement. The students were angry when Louise told a teacher about the incident. They thought they could get away with such behavior, but after Louise's complaints, they feared their parents would be called to the school. So on the same day, they decided to take revenge on the girl and eliminate her, so that Louise could no longer complain to anyone. The older girl decided it was worth inviting Louise to a visit under the pretense of reconciliation. This way, they could gain her trust and lure her away from the protection of adults. It would settle things once and for all. As a murder weapon, the older girl took a kitchen knife. When the victim took the bait and came to visit, the girls initially lulled the gullible peer's vigilance. They drank tea and watched some videos on the internet. Everything seemed fine. When Louise then wanted to go home, the older classmate offered to walk with her and accompany her through the forest. In her opinion, this was a shorter way to Louise's house. The three had nothing to fear and could continue talking. Louise naively agreed. This was the last time she was seen alive by the parents of the student she visited. According to the adults, this happened around 5:30 p.m. The girls left the house together and moved away to avoid accidental witnesses. Then the friends accused the protagonist of the story of betrayal. The argument escalated quickly, and all three began to quarrel. The offended children lost their temper. Then the younger girl grabbed the victim, put a plastic bag over her head, and hit her with a stone. This wound did not kill the student. She began to resist, but the older girl did not relent, grabbed Louise, and began stabbing her with a knife. After the attack, the teenagers left their peer. According to them, she was still alive, but probably not for long. The girl lost consciousness and bled heavily, with no one to help her, though she soon died. The investigators believed the attack was too brutal for the children. The girls came from simple families and had not previously had problems with the law, making it seem impossible for them to have committed such a brutal murder. Initially, it was suspected that an older third teenager was involved, holding the knife. However, the two girls repeatedly insisted that no one else was with them and that they had killed their friend. Only when the knife was found could fingerprints and DNA be compared on the murder weapon. The girls admitted that they had discarded the weapon nearby in the forest, but could not remember the exact location. They managed to reach the old train station with their victim, where the body was later found. Kitchen knife was discarded not far from this place. The searchers combed the entire area, but the police could not find the valuable piece of evidence. According to the murderer, it was a large knife, an important piece of evidence in the case, as it would have shown who had it at the time of the murder. The police still believed the girls were lying and hoped to identify a third person whose DNA prints or fingerprints were on the handle. However, the children continued to insist that they had committed the murder. Forensic pathologists and forensic experts were informed. The forensic examination revealed 30 stab wounds inflicted on Louise in the abdomen, back, chest, and neck. She resisted as long as she could and then fell to the ground from blood loss. After that, her classmates inflicted several more stab wounds on her. The examination found DNA traces of only 3 people at the scene of the crime: the victim herself and the 2 confessing students. Ultimately, the police accepted the girls' statements as true and found no evidence of another person's involvement. According to German law, one is only criminally responsible from the age of 14, so none of those involved in the murder could be arrested and punished. However, the collected materials were handed over to the Youth Welfare Office, which was to work with the young murderers. The school attended by the girls opened on Monday. Child psychologists worked on-site to provide the frightened students with the necessary help and support. The psychologists worked at the educational institution for 3 days. During this time, no classes took place, and the specialists spoke with some students who were shocked by the events. Joint sessions were also held in the classroom. The psychologists helped the teachers understand and respond to the children's reaction. Even after 3 days, the psychologists continued to talk to the students. Then, classes resumed without changes to the program. As a sign of mourning, the national flag was lowered throughout the city. On March 22nd, the 12-year-old victim of the brutal massacre was buried at the request of the parents at the place where the body was found. A memorial was erected where many city residents gathered. Surprisingly, perpetrators felt no great remorse. Although they cried at the police station, they quickly came to their senses and showed no remorse for their action. The girls cold-bloodedly committed a premeditated massacre and posted videos of a dance on their TikTok accounts the next day. Later, their accounts were deleted due to numerous complaints. They interacted with peers as if the murder was normal for them. It is known that they were separated from their families for some time and taken to the youth department, where psychologists and psychiatrists worked with the teenagers. It was also necessary to find out if the children had mental disabilities that led to the tragic outcome. Perhaps they needed treatment. According to the country's legislation, they would not be held responsible for their actions in this situation. The prosecutor's office closed the investigation and the case after determining that the children had indeed killed their classmate themselves. There was no reason to suspect a third person of committing the massacre. The chief prosecutor said at a press conference that the perpetrators should be protected because they were still children and emotions played an important role in this case. The shocked parents of the murdered girl were beside themselves with grief and disbelief at this decision. They could not believe that such a brutal murder of their daughter by monsters could go unpunished. Thanks to their outrage and commitment, this shocking case of child cruelty became the talk of the town. All of this led to a debate about the inadequacy of the German legal system, which not only allows such cases, but is also completely powerless to punish the perpetrators. Public dissatisfaction was so great that the families of the young murderers were eventually forced to leave the city. Parents of the girls were constantly harassed by the local population, who were outraged by the situation and feared living near the murderers and their families. The neighbors began openly threatening the parents of the disturbed children, so the families of the murderers left their homes for safety reasons. Their children, however, are still in a state institution, and their parents remain in contact with them. In reality, parents of the murderers are the only ones seriously affected by their children's atrocity. The girls had already been taken from them for some time, and there is a possibility they may never return to their family. They might be placed in a juvenile home or given to foster parents. For a long time, nothing was known about this, as Germany has very strict laws protecting the privacy of even the most violent criminals and their families, let alone children, especially in such complex cases as the murder of a schoolgirl. For the same reason, their real names and photos are not published. Psychologists and psychiatrists have been working with the perpetrators for a long time, and no mental disabilities have been found in the children, making the brutality of the attack even more shocking. It was a heinous crime. The children killed cold-bloodedly and deliberately, armed with a knife, lured Louise into a trap, and then brutally slaughtered her. All this happened solely out of revenge, which the students confirmed to the police. Many experts began to look for the culprits for this tragedy, which unleashed a whole wave of negativity and hatred toward the parents of the girls. Thanks to the current German law, they could simply change their names and now live in a place where no one knows about their connection to the brutal murder of the girl or even suspects that they might be dangerous. The incident has sparked a wave of protests and discussions across the country. In general, according to a number of experts, the number of crimes, including particularly serious ones involving minors, is increasing every year in Germany. Many more cases have become known, such as the case of the teenager from Wunsdorf. Both were 14 years old and went to the same class. In this case, one of the boys had been bullied for years, and finally, he killed the other boy with a blunt object in the summer of 2022. Another shocking case occurred when 13 and 14-year-old classmates strangled their friend. Indeed, serious crimes are also committed by younger children. The number of such cases involving minors exceeds a dozen each year in Germany alone. All this causes great concern throughout the country, especially since these cases seem to be the most shocking for the families and friends of both the victims and the perpetrators, who have gone astray even before graduating from school. The incidents are extremely traumatizing. The waves of indignation have not subsided to this day. An initiative group has launched a petition calling for changes to the legislation and a reduction in the age of criminal responsibility. In the first days, it was signed by more than 40,000 people. Some experts believe that violence on television and in video games is to blame for the problem, which could be a trigger. Statistics experts have analyzed a large number of games and TV shows with violent scenes and concluded that all this initially imposes violent models that encourage young people to solve problems with violence. Given their fragile psyche, the situation is further exacerbated. Some experts believe that control over such issues should be entirely in the hands of the state and that the process of a child's upbringing should be monitored. There is also a radical opinion that the community system should be responsible for raising children, as parents cannot always ensure the full development of a person. According to local residents, the parents of the murderers are to blame for this massacre because they raised them poorly. Perhaps they were completely indifferent to the children's lives or treated them cruelly. All this contributed to the children deciding that the best way out was to kill a former friend. It is impossible to know for sure what the environment was like in which the students grew up. Thanks for watching, and take care of yourselves. Today we will delve into the atmosphere not only of human tragedies, but also of heroism, something not inherent in everyone. On the eve of Christmas 1990, the Tiede sisters, 20-year-old Louise and 16-year-old Tricia, were incredibly excited when they learned that they would spend the upcoming holidays with their family in their cozy cabin in the mountains of Utah, in Reber Canyon. The time and the quiet landscape offered them the opportunity to escape the hustle and bustle of everyday life and be alone with their thoughts. The house was so far from civilization that in winter it was only accessible by snowmobile when the ground was covered with a thick layer of snow. The Tiede family loved their mountain cabin, where they could escape reality, and every year a large, friendly group of people happily gathered there. 49-year-old Kate Tiede and her 76-year-old mother, Beth Pott, volunteered to decorate the cabin for Christmas. Create a festive atmosphere, they hung stockings over the fireplace. 2 days before Christmas Eve, on December 22, 1990, the entire family went to Salt Lake City for business. What they could not have known was that at the same time, 2 men were breaking into their cozy mountain home. The 25-year-old Lester Taylor and the 21-year-old Edward Stephen Day had been released on parole from prison about a week earlier, on December 14, 1990, as part of a special program for the socialization of prisoners. Day had been sentenced to 5 years in prison for arson in 1989, while Taylor was serving a 15-year sentence for aggravated burglary. Both were supposed to find a job before Christmas and return to the correctional facility. However, instead of fulfilling their obligations, the men went on the run and found the perfect place to hide while they were being hunted. While staying in the Tiede family cabin, Taylor called a fellow inmate at the Salt Lake City Community Correctional Center and told him that he and Day planned to rob some vacant cabin. He also excitedly announced that he wanted to wait for the residents to return to the cabin they were staying in so they could steal their car. As Louise, her mother Kate, and her grandmother Beth made their way home, they were unaware of the danger awaiting them. They trudged through a snowstorm, freezing to the bone, eager to reach the warm, cozy house. Louise urged her mother to hurry and open the door as her hands were ice cold. Kate picked up the shopping bags and walked to the door, while Louise peeked through the kitchen window, and noticed movement behind the refrigerator. She wasn't particularly alarmed as the family was expecting guests. Lenai assumed it was her cousin, who had decided to surprise them by hiding, ready to suddenly appear with a hug. However, when Lenai entered and began unpacking, an unknown man with curly hair and a gray hoodie emerged from behind the refrigerator and pointed a gun at the young woman. Around the same time, Kate was confronted by a second assailant, came out of the bedroom with a pistol in hand. Kate looked at the strangers in shock and asked what they wanted. She continued speaking, telling the men they could take whatever they needed. For a few seconds, there was absolute silence in the room, and then gunshots rang out. Taylor shot Kate and Beth without any warning or remorse before they even realized what was happening. Lenai watched in horror as her mother fell to the floor, and moments later, she saw her grandmother being shot in the head. Everything around her was soaked in blood, and it seemed to Lenai that what was happening had nothing to do with reality. She heard her grandmother gasping for air and saw a large pool of blood spreading under her mother's body. Only when everything around her became silent did time seem to slow down and normalize, and she realized that her mother and grandmother were dead. Despite the trauma she had experienced, Lenai quickly began considering all possible outcomes in her head, trying to figure out how to protect the other family members from the nightmare in the cabin. Eventually, Lenai decided to lure the criminals out of the cabin before her father and sister returned. Rolf and Tricia were following the mountain path with a slight delay, giving Lenai hope that she still had enough time. Unfortunately, as she went to the garage to show the criminals where her father had hidden the car keys, she heard the sound of an approaching snowmobile. At that moment, a man in a gray hoodie grabbed Lenai from behind, put his arm around her neck, and pressed a gun to her back. Rolf and Tricia had just driven into the driveway when one of the assailants, wearing a ski mask, sprang towards them and ordered the newly arrived family members into the house. When Rolf saw the tears in his eldest daughter's eyes, he immediately realized that something terrible had happened to his wife and mother-in-law. Quietly entered the house, and the criminals asked him if he had any money. The man pulled everything he had out of his pockets and threw it on the floor. In that second, Taylor ordered Day to shoot Rolf, but for some reason, the gun didn't fire. The weapon had misfired. At that moment, Taylor, who was holding Lenai, drew his weapon and aimed it at Rolf. First time he pulled the trigger, there was no shot, and the same thing happened the second time. However, the third shot was successful and so powerful that Lenai, who was being held by Taylor, felt the recoil. The bullet hit Rolf right in the face, and he immediately fell to the ground. Lenai thought her father was dead, just like her mother and grandmother. Unable to look at the lifeless bodies of her relatives, she tried to distract herself by looking around the cabin. She noticed that the festive food had been eaten and the gifts had been opened. Obviously, the criminals had been in the house for some time, waiting specifically for the return of the cabin owner. Since there were always several reserve cans of gasoline for the snowmobiles in the cabin, Taylor and Day decided to set the house on fire before leaving. They poured gasoline on the upper floors, threw in a match, and ran outside. Moments later, the fire alarm sounded, and the intruders fled the scene. Lenai and Tricia were forced to drive the snowmobiles, while Taylor and Day sat behind them. At that moment, both sisters thought they would be killed as soon as they helped the criminals reach their destination. They went through many escape scenarios in their minds, but none guaranteed their survival. Luckily, a neighbor of the Tiede family heard the gunshots and saw the snowmobiles speeding off into the distance. He immediately called the police to report the incident. As Lenai and Tricia made their way to the gate leading to the main road, they spotted their uncle, Randy Zorn, who was visiting for the holidays. When he saw his nieces on the snowmobiles, he assumed they were out with friends and began waving at them. Knowing that their uncle was in grave danger, the sisters ignored his greeting and sped past. Randy was surprised that his nieces didn't acknowledge him, and so went down to the parking lot, where the Tiede family usually parked their cars. One of the assailants asked Tricia about Randy. The girl lied and said he was just a friendly neighbor who lived nearby in the mountain. When they reached the parking lot where the car was parked, the men forcibly placed the sisters in the back seat. Tricia noticed that one of the men had placed his gun in the trunk and thought they had a chance to escape. However, the assailant immediately approached them as if reading their thoughts, unzipped his coat, and revealed a knife hidden in an inside pocket. Randy reached the parking lot just as the family's vehicle was pulling away and saw a frightened Louise in the back seat of the car. He waved his arms again, trying to stop the car, but the girls ignored their uncle once more, attempting to save his life. As he stood there, still not understanding what was happening, Randy noticed a snowmobile approaching him. The driver of the snowmobile was not properly dressed, wasn't wearing a helmet, coat, gloves. As the snowmobile drew closer, Randy recognized his brother Rolf. His face was severely swollen, and bloody icicles hung from his chin. He told his brother that he had miraculously survived the headshot and the house fire, pretending to be dead and trying not to make a sound while the criminals were in the cabin. After Louise and Tricia left the cabin with the criminals, Rolf sprang from the ground and snuck into the bathroom. He tore off his burning winter suit and climbed into the shower to extinguish the flames. He could think of nothing else but saving his daughters. The man found the strength to change clothes, jumped on his snowmobile, and raced towards the highway. When Randy saw that his brother was seriously injured, he placed Rolf in the back seat of his car and drove himself. Although it was the early 1990s, Randy's car was equipped with a mobile phone, which he used to call emergency services. The cell service in the mountains was poor, so Randy tried several times to contact the authorities before succeeding. While he stayed on the line, Randy caught up with the criminals' vehicle and considered running it off the road. He informed the Summit County Sheriff's Department of the incident and gave exact details of the direction the criminals' vehicle was heading. Randy also said that his brother was injured and needed immediate medical assistance. At this point, the call was disconnected, but Randy didn't give up. He stopped at a nearby gas station and used a payphone to notify emergency services. Rolf was soon taken to the hospital in critical condition, and the police engaged in a multi-hour pursuit until the criminals lost control of the vehicle and drove off the embankment. Remarkably, Louise and Tricia were completely unharmed. They crawled out of the overturned car, raised their hands, and told the officers that they had been held hostage. Police surrounded the car and the criminals were forced to surrender. The terrified girls screamed that the criminals should be shot on the spot because they had killed their grandmother, mother, and father without remorse. Louise and Tricia gasped for air, overwhelmed by emotions, and had little idea of what had happened in the past few hours. One of the officers turned to the trembling girls and informed them that their father had survived. He also mentioned that Rolf had not only been shot, but also doused with gasoline and set on fire. Nonetheless, their father had found the strength to run almost blindly down the mountain on a snowmobile to save his daughters. This news brought some relief to Louise and Tricia, who then began to listen to the police's account of what had happened. The girls had always considered their father a hero, but now he had earned that title 100 times over. After Taylor and Day were arrested, they were charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder, attempted murder, and kidnapping. Additionally, they were charged with assault, theft, and arson. Investigations revealed that the criminals had hitchhiked to Weber Canyon and had not chosen the location randomly. Lester Taylor's family owned a cabin nearby, and the criminal was familiar with the area. Taylor and Day spent several days in the mountains, breaking into empty cabins, robbing them, and moving on. They discovered the Tiede family when they got on their snowmobiles and headed into town. The burglars sneaked into the cabin and waited for the owners at return to carry out their sinister plan. The officer who arrived first at the scene immediately noticed a large pool of blood in the garage that had frozen due to the sub-zero temperatures. When he entered the house, he could smell burnt hair, skin, and clothing. But he didn't stop. He kept walking slowly. The entire top floor was ablaze. The carpet in the living room was soaked with blood, and what was once a cozy house now looked like a scene from a horror movie. After the fire was extinguished, the investigators were able to examine the house more closely. It turned out that Taylor and Day had dragged the bodies of their victims across the living room floor and out onto the terrace. To cover up their crime, they covered the bodies with blankets and then with snow. The blood of Kate and Beth soaked into the wooden floorboards, seeping through the cracks and forming bright red icicles underneath. One of the officers found a video camera in the cabin with footage that later became crucial evidence in the trial. The video showed Taylor, armed, opening the Tiede family's Christmas presents, while Day laughed and supported his accomplice's actions. During the investigation, the main task of the investigators was to determine precisely which crimes each of the men had committed. According to Louise, each criminal bore equal responsibility for what had happened. About 5 months after the horrific attack on the Tiede family home, Taylor pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder in exchange for all other charges against him being dropped. He was tried before a jury and claimed throughout the trial that he suffered from memory lapses and could not remember many details of the crime. He was sentenced to death for each murder, but showed no remorse and remained calm and composed even after the verdict was announced. A few weeks later, Edward Stephen Day was brought to trial. He was found guilty of second-degree murder and sentenced to 62 years in prison. Could be released from prison in 2053. However, the judge who presided over the trial recommended that Day should not be released early under any circumstance. Louise and Tricia testified in both trials, showing incredible bravery in recounting the horrors of that terrible December day despite their age and trauma. The girls spoke calmly, in detail, and without emotion. Louise was outraged when she was asked to hold the guns that had been used to murder her mother and grandmother during the trial, but she managed to control her emotions and demonstrated in detail how the criminals had acted. When Rolf Tiede entered the courtroom, Day's face froze in an expression of utter surprise. At that moment, the girls looked around and realized they had won. None of the criminals had suspected that Rolf had survived and directly contributed to their imprisonment. In 2001, Day wrote a letter to the family of his victims, confessing to the crime. He claimed that he had not intended to kill anyone, only to rob the cabin and escape, but Taylor had other plans. Day said that after the murders, he had no choice but to accept what had happened and move on with his life. It took Louise more than 9 years to respond to this letter. She decided to forgive Day, but added that forgiving did not mean forgetting. Shortly after writing this letter, she filed a petition with the Pardon Board, requesting that Edward Day not be released under any circumstance. Louise is still convinced that even as a 70-year-old man, Day is capable of murder and will continue to fight until the end to ensure that Day spends the rest of his life in prison. Despite Taylor's repeated attempts to appeal his sentence, he remains on death row, while Tricia and Louise wait for the day when they can finally see with their own eyes the life leave the body of the man who killed their mother and grandmother. After Louise's first marriage ended in divorce, she married her childhood friend and is confident that Nathan has changed her for the better. The couple raises 9 children together, and firmly believes that there is much more good in the world than evil. Tricia, a divorced mother of 2, cherishes her life and claims that the terrible December day in 1990 did not define her, but helped her become the person she is today. In the years since the fire, Rolf has worked to rebuild the cabin and make it even better than before. Family still gathers at the cabin for the holidays and enjoys each other's company. Rolf and his daughters believe that criminals should not be allowed to take more from them than they already have. Louise and Tricia consider the cabin a special place, magical and healing, as if the souls of their mother and grandmother watch over everyone who enters. Rolf lived a fulfilling life, enjoying every moment surrounded by his daughters and numerous grandchildren. When he was diagnosed with cancer, the entire family came together to spend the last weeks of his life with Rolf. He passed away in 2008, surrounded by loved ones. Christmas holidays of 1990 were meant to be one of the happiest celebrations in the Tiede family's life. Fate had other plans. Just 3 days after Christmas, Beth Potts and Kate Tiede were buried. Louise remembered her grandmother as a lively, cheerful, and vibrant woman. She was full of life and never boring, always coming up with fun activities for the whole family. Once, Beth even decided to give her granddaughter a wonderful hairstyle herself, which resulted in her hair looking terrible, causing the house to shake with laughter. Kate Tiede was an incredibly devoted mother for whom her daughters always came first. The girls considered their mother their most important and loyal friend. She was someone who never judged, always listened, and lived with an open heart. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.
The 3 kilometers walk at dawn along the deserted country road was long and a bit frightening. Bonnie knew it wasn't safe to go alone, but the pepper spray in her jacket pocket gave her some comfort. She knew that in case of unforeseen danger, she could defend herself. On September 28, 1994, 18-year-old Bonnie Craig woke up at 5 a.m., freshened up, packed her notebooks into her backpack, and, as usual, headed to the bus stop. Bonnie left before sunrise. She had a 45-minute walk to the bus stop. The student liked to be a bit early at the university. Bonnie was born in Calgary, Canada, in 1975. Her biological father played little role in her and her older brother Jason's lives. They were raised by their stepfather, Gary Campbell, who loved the children and treated them as his own from the first meeting. When Bonnie was 5 years old, another son, Adam, joined the family of Karen and Gary, and 2 years later, a daughter, Samantha. The younger sister became like a living doll to Bonnie. She loved dressing the little girl in princess dresses and teaching her the life lessons she herself knew. Gary, the father, worked for many years for an oil and gas company and was regularly transferred to new construction sites. Bonnie attended 6 primary schools and 2 high schools, learning to adapt to changes easily and quickly make new friends. From sunny California with a pool in the backyard, the family moved to snowy Anchorage, then to West Texas, and finally back to the picturesque landscapes of Alaska. Then, Ken and Gary divorced, a sudden change for all the children. Samantha and Adam now spent 1 week with their father and the other with their mother. Bonnie focused entirely on her studies. She also swam, trained in diving, rode horses, wrote poems, and played the violin and viola in the school orchestra. However, the girl's life constantly brought traumatic surprises. Only when her closest friend died in a drunk driving accident did she overcome her parents' divorce. This event changed Bonnie's life forever. She swore never to drink alcohol again and to avoid driving altogether. She walked or took the bus, fearing an accident, and refused to take a driving test. Bonnie even founded a school club against drunk driving. After high school, Bonnie enrolled at the University of Alaska Anchorage to become a psychologist. Her then boyfriend, Cameron Miyasaki, studied architecture at the University of California, Berkeley. They spent a lot of time on the phone and often emailed each other. The house with her mother became increasingly crowded. The woman started dating a man who had 3 children of his own, so Bonnie decided to move into her stepfather's house, where she could be more independent. Additionally, his house was only 15 minutes from her university. 3 days a week, she took the bus to school, walking the 3 kilometers to the bus stop and enjoying the fresh Alaskan air. Bonnie also worked part-time at Sam's Club. The girl had a great interest in life and reason to be optimistic. On September 28, 1994, Bonnie left her stepfather's house to go to the bus stop to get to her college courses. 9 hours later, another student from the University of Anchorage was photographing the landscape on a hiking trail in Chugach State Park. This park is about 24 kilometers from Bonnie's residence. Mid-September is a good time to enjoy the park's surroundings. The weather is still warm enough for Alaska, the days are long, and the beauty of the landscape is captivating. The student focused her camera lens on the picturesque view. Below, something caught her eye, a light blue object floating in the water below a 10-meter cliff. As the girl approached to take a closer look at the object, she made a gruesome discovery. A woman's body was floating lifelessly in the shallow water. She lay face down in an unusual position and was fully clothed. This was an inaccessible section of the McHugh Creek. One could only reach it from the top of a cliff or by walking several kilometers along the riverbed. If someone slipped and fell from above, it would inevitably lead to death. That's what the arriving police also thought. The poor woman who was enjoying the sights and sounds of the beautiful park lost her balance and fell to her death. The body was taken to the coroner, who examined it for injuries and identified it. According to the coroner's report, the girl had drowned. She also suffered severe head injuries, possibly from a fall off a cliff. The investigators identified the deceased as Bonnie Craig, based on the class ring usually worn by graduates in honor of their college or university graduation. The next step was to verify this assumption by contacting the girl's family. The tragic news of their daughter's death reached Karen while on a short trip with her new partner, Jim. They had traveled to a small harbor town for a relative's wedding, where Karen would meet Jim's parents for the first time. The woman enjoyed herself in the company of her future in-laws, laughing and joking, unaware of the horrible fate that had befallen her beloved Bonnie. She and Jim spent the night on a yacht when there was a knock on the door at 3 a.m. Upon hearing the wild news about her daughter, Karen thought it was a prank. How could her studious daughter be alone in the park while college classes were going on? Such news would have been a blow to any parent who cared for their child from birth. But Karen was no ordinary parent. For the last 3 years, she had worked as an undercover police officer for the Anchorage Police Department. She was a police academy graduate working on cases involving the distribution of illegal substances. She was highly regarded in her job for her ability to solve complex problems. Naturally, Karen cared for her children like any other parent, but she primarily had the mind of an investigator. She wanted the case transferred to her department because she didn't believe her daughter's death was just an accident. As she had been told, the woman inquired about the details of the accident. Were there any signs of forced sexual intercourse? To which the police responded that the girl was fully clothed. But that meant nothing, and Karen had to get to the bottom of it. The grieving mother was convinced that her daughter could not have been several kilometers away from home during school hours. Bonnie did not drive, and it was impossible that she would miss her classes. And if she did, there had to be a good reason. Until the last moment, Karen hoped it was a mistake. What shocked her even more was that no evidence had been found at the scene, not even the girl's belongings. It seemed to the woman that the police wanted to dismiss the case as an accident, but she was not ready to give up so quickly. On the first flight to Alaska, Karen went to the identification, still hoping it was not Bonnie and that there was a reasonable explanation why everyone thought it was her daughter who had died. The hardest part was going to the morgue to see the girl's body with her own eyes. Confused, the woman walked down the hallway into the cold room. It was like being in a movie, only now it was real life. With a shaky hand, Karen pulled back the sheet from her face. Her Bonnie lay before her, frozen and lifeless, but it was indeed her daughter. As a mother, Karen felt in her heart that this was no accident, and as a police officer, she wanted confirmation. When she took her daughter's hand and noticed that the girl's knuckles were bruised and swollen, she demanded that the police come and take photographs, as these were clearly defensive wounds. Moreover, this was the last chance for the mother to gather as much information as possible since her daughter would soon be buried. However, the police tried to convince the woman that the injuries were from a fall and took no action. So, Karen decided to take a different approach. She reached out to reporters she knew and launched an information blitz. All the local newspapers jumped on the story of how a young, pretty student was found dead in a creek. The news spread much faster than the investigators could respond. The mother even tried to contact her superiors, but since the time had run out, even he could not help her. The case was outside his jurisdiction. The next day, Karen, Jim, Jason, Adam, and Samantha went to the funeral home to say goodbye to Bonnie. It was hard to see a loved one who had recently been so full of life, now just a body. But the siblings wanted to be with Bonnie one last time to say goodbye. The funeral director asked for a quick decision on which coffin the girl should be placed in. But Karen did not want to risk losing potential evidence. So, she said she wanted Bonnie's body placed in a stone tomb, thinking of the future. The woman would be able to exhume the body if anyone listened to her opinion. The media brought more frustration than help. Karen was called to the police station and asked not to fuel the fire by calling the accident a crime, as this would hinder the investigation. The officers explained that they were just considering all possibilities and did not want to scare away any suspects at this point. The first person on this list was Gary Campbell, Bonnie's stepfather. According to the investigators, the man was supposed to be on a business trip on the day of the tragedy, but for some reason, he returned earlier, and there was a dispute between him and Bonnie. This information baffled Karen even more. Could the man who had raised the girl as his own daughter have done something to her? What would have to happen for Gary to take such a step? When Karen went to her ex-husband's house to pick up her daughter's belongings, the bedroom door was locked. The man accused his ex-wife of theft, claiming she had taken Bonnie's photo without permission and given it to the police. He considered the girl his daughter and could not allow anyone to take his last memory of her. Bonnie's death hit her younger sister Samantha, then 12, very hard. The girl began to struggle in school, unable to concentrate on anything at home. Samantha had shared everything with Bonnie and was now lost without her support. The turmoil surrounding her older sister's death made the girl even doubt her own father. She no longer knew what to believe. One evening, Gary put Samantha to bed. The girl looked at him with frightened eyes and asked, "Did you really take Bonnie's life?" The man was shocked and deeply hurt by these words. But then he pulled himself together and assured Samantha that he would never harm her sister. This reassured the girl. Later, the police asked Adam and Samantha to tell their stories independently, and the children revealed that their father, Gary, was at home on the day of Bonnie's death. He had gone to work long after his sister had left. His whereabouts were confirmed by colleagues and superiors, and the suspicion was diverted from the man. The coroner's investigation revealed that Bonnie had been dead for several hours when found. It was determined that she died from drowning. However, she had suffered several severe head injuries, probably related to a fall from the cliff, or they were caused by a blunt object. The police became interested in how the girl got to the park and thoroughly examined the crime scene. At first, it didn't seem suspicious at all, as Bonnie's death was classified as an accident. But an investigator on the cliff found a sheet with a drop of blood about 1.5 meters from the edge. Tests showed it was the blood of the deceased girl, But how could there be blood if Bonnie was injured in the fall? The police began to consider the possibility of a crime and that Bonnie had not fallen off the cliff accidentally. This case would be complicated, and they would have to proceed cautiously. Therefore, they did not tell the media or the family that they suspected foul play. That was their tactic. They did not want to scare away the perpetrator, assuming it could be someone close to the deceased girl. Therefore, the wave of information triggered by Karen could have hindered the investigation. The day of Bonnie's funeral arrived. The service was held in a church that the student occasionally visited. Bonnie's boyfriend arrived from California. He looked very upset. This was not the meeting he had dreamed of. Even her biological father, Gordon Sig, appeared. Though he hadn't raised his daughter, he wanted to say goodbye to her. Everyone who loved the smiling girl was there. So Karen decided to conduct her own investigation. She walked the entire route her daughter had taken at dawn, starting from Gary's house. She tried to imagine what Bonnie might have felt, thought about, or noticed that morning. Her mother realized for the first time how unsafe the path the girl took several times a week was. Tall trees surrounded her on both sides. In the darkness, it seemed as if an invisible danger lurked behind each one in the form of a wild animal or a dangerous person. She wondered why Bonnie hadn't asked her father to drive her. She had to walk the 3 kilometers every time. Then, it dawned on her that her daughter was as stubborn as she was. The girl didn't want to bother anyone and tried to handle difficulties independently. Karen had also taught Bonnie from a young age never to get into a car with a stranger. She was sure that if her daughter had accepted a ride, it could only have been with someone she knew and trusted. When the walk yielded no clues, Karen returned to her car and drove around the neighborhood, hoping to find Bonnie's backpack or other items that might lead to a breakthrough in the case. She searched ditches, looked in bushes, and went everywhere but found nothing. The woman began the new year, 1995, with a call to the sergeant in charge of Bonnie's case. She directly asked him if her daughter had been sexually assaulted, and the investigator had no choice but to tell the truth. Karen gained access to her daughter's autopsy report but was asked to keep it strictly confidential. The girl was indeed found clothed. During the medical examination, a swab was taken containing male DNA. There were also injuries to the genitals. However, this information was kept secret because it was not yet clear to whom the DNA belonged. DNA samples were taken from all the men involved in the case, but no matches had been found so far. Several witnesses saw the girl walking towards the bus stop that morning. However, no one saw her board the bus. So how could Bonnie end up in Chugach Park, 24 kilometers from her home, and what was she doing there? The investigators believed she was attacked in the dark. Bonnie's death had now been almost a year ago when Jim's relatives invited him and Karen on a week-long yacht trip to relax a bit. The woman was initially reluctant since the sailboat was associated with the tragic news of her daughter's death. But throughout the year, she had been crying and investigating, and it was an opportunity to escape her disturbing thoughts for a while. The entire family, including Karen, Jim, his brother Ken, and Ken's wife, enjoyed a whole week of the sights and sounds of the sea. As soon as they docked on the coast, they were informed that the Coast Guard was trying to contact them because there was a family emergency. Karen's thoughts flashed back a year. The heartbreaking memories of Bonnie returned. She thought something had happened to her child again, but this time, the news was not for her but for Jim and Ken. The brothers were told their father had died of a heart attack. None of them could believe it, as they had just congratulated him on his 63rd birthday days earlier. And he was fine. Thus, a sea voyage had twice become a harbinger of terrible news for this family. Karen's other children had gone through a lot. They had not only lost their sister but practically their mother as well. Unfortunately, their mother's life was filled with finding the person responsible for Bonnie's death. They did not get the attention they deserved, and Karen could not give up the investigation because she felt that if she did not get justice for her daughter, she would betray her. Yet she also felt the case would never be solved. Years passed, the children grew up, and Karen became a grandmother for the first time to Adam's youngest son, who needed a corneal transplant as his eyesight deteriorated. After the surgery, the boy was blind in one eye. Karen married Jim, and after years of marriage, they separated. During this time, her brother and mother, who had held everything together, passed away. But none of this could outweigh the pain of losing Bonnie. No one could count the sleepless nights, panic attacks, or outbursts of anger or imagine how deep the depression was that the mother and the entire family of the deceased girl experienced. On January 5, 2007, 12 years later, Karen was traveling around the world with her friend. In a hotel on a small island in the Caribbean, she was just checking her emails when she came across one from an unknown sender titled, Bonnie. Her heart sank. The case was still unsolved at that time, and now it was in the hands of a new team of investigators. They matched the DNA sample from Bonnie's swab with a new database and found a match. The man was imprisoned for a series of armed robberies in Yuma. Upon a preliminary background check, it turned out that this man was in Alaska at the time of Bonnie's death. The man's name was Kenneth Dion. He was born in 1969 and was 25 at the time of the tragedy. His DNA had been entered into the database in late 2006. His name had never come up before in connection with Bonnie. The man had a martial arts belt and had won prizes at various competitions. He also served in the U.S. Army for a time, from which he was discharged for using prohibited substances. Kenneth often carried things like a grappling hook, a large rake, a 3-section martial arts staff, and nunchaku in his car. The man had been in and out of prison several times, and on that tragic day for Bonnie, he had only been out of jail for a few months before being locked up again for violating his probation. In May 2007, Dion was charged with the assault and murder of Bonnie Craig. The man allegedly attacked the girl on her way to a bus stop, hit her several times with a martial arts tool, committed a sexual offense, and threw her body off a cliff in a park. When the information about Bonnie went public, more facts came to light. This man was no stranger to breaking the law. He had been convicted 18 times, 10 for misdemeanors and twice for felonies. If his DNA had been in the database earlier, the case would have been closed. After Kenneth was extradited, he filed several pretrial motions, delaying the case by years. It was an incredibly challenging time for the whole family. Every time they had to attend a hearing, it felt like they were losing Bonnie all over again. The barely healed wound began to bleed. 17 years after Bonnie's death, in 2011, Kenneth Dion was sentenced to 124 years in prison, 99 years for murder and 25 years for assaulting the girl. Kenneth himself showed no remorse and never admitted to his crime. If he reaches the age of 80, he could be released on parole. Bonnie was an athletic girl. Perhaps she could have overpowered him somehow, but unfortunately, that didn't happen. We will never know exactly what happened to Bonnie that early September morning, but her death has changed the lives of many people around her. The younger sister, Samantha, became a 911 dispatcher, and the older brother, Jason, graduated as a paramedic. Karen still can't believe that her Bonnie will never be by her side again. To honor her daughter, she wrote a book titled Justice for Bonnie, which recounts some moments from this story. Thank you for watching, and take care of yourselves.